"Don't stop, I need this." Widow begs a haunted cowboy during a deadly winter storm. Snow fell in heavy, thick sheets across the wide, empty plains, turning everything into a white, silent world. The wind whipped across the land, making the trees groan and the fences shiver under the weight of ice. On this remote stretch of land, miles from any town, a lone cabin stood against the storm. Its wooden walls were darkened with age, the roof thick with layers of frozen snow, and the windows frosted over with patterns like icy lace. Inside, the air was warm, filled with the soft glow of the fireplace and the smell of burning wood. Eli Turner, a man of quiet strength, moved slowly around his cabin, checking the fire and stacking more logs. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with weathered skin and eyes that had seen too much sadness. His hands were calloused from years of hard work on the land, but they still carried a gentleness that few people ever got to see. For years, Eli had lived alone, seeking nothing more than the silence of the open plains. After losing his family to a terrible accident, he had shut himself away from the world, believing that connection only led to pain. He had learned to live with the quiet, letting the wind and snow be his company. Outside, the storm was growing stronger. Snow whipped across the land like tiny shards of glass, and the wind howled in a way that seemed almost alive. Every so often, a gust would hit the cabin, shaking the walls and making the fire flicker. Eli tightened his coat and stepped to the window, squinting through the snow. The land stretched endlessly, a frozen desert with no sign of life. For someone who had lived through loneliness, this isolation was comforting. The emptiness of the world mirrored the emptiness in his heart. But then, a sound cut through the wind, a faint, desperate knocking at the door. It was soft at first, almost like the snow itself was tapping against the wood. Eli froze. Visitors were rare in these parts, and anyone out here in such a storm was taking a serious risk. He frowned, tension rising in his chest. He had learned long ago that some risks were better left alone. The knocking came again, louder this time. Urgent. There was fear in it, pleading in it. Eli hesitated for a moment, his instincts telling him to ignore it. But something about the sound made him pause. It was not the confident knock of a traveler or the bold call of a neighbor. It was fragile, trembling. It carried the weight of desperation, and somehow It pierced the wall of solitude that Eli had built around himself. Slowly, he approached the door and peered through the small window. Through the swirling snow, he saw a figure struggling against the storm. A woman bundled in threadbare clothing, her face pale and frozen from the cold. She had a small bundle pressed to her chest, and she staggered as the wind knocked her off balance. Eli's heart tightened, a reaction he hadn't felt in years. He wanted to turn away, to retreat into the safety of his cabin, but something made him stop. The woman knocked again, harder now, her hand shaking from cold and fear. Eli opened the door just a crack. "Who's there?" he called, his voice rough from disuse. The woman's eyes met his, wide with fear and exhaustion. Please help me," she said, her voice trembling. I don't know how much longer I can last out here. My children, they're waiting, and I can't." She coughed, shivering violently, and her words broke off. "Don't stop. I need this. Please." Eli stared at her for a long moment. Her plea was raw, desperate, and hopeless, and it struck a chord deep inside him. He had been alone for years, hiding from grief and fear. Yet now this woman had walked through the storm to find him. He could see the snow clinging to her hair and coat, see the exhaustion in her eyes. Every instinct told him to shut the door, to leave her to the storm, but he didn't. Instead, he stepped aside. "Come in," he said, his voice quieter now, almost unsteady. "Quickly, before the wind, before you freeze." The woman stumbled inside, grateful, and Eli shut the door behind her. The warmth of the cabin hit her first, followed by the scent of burning wood and dry earth. She sank to the floor, hugging her knees, her face buried in her hands. Eli knelt beside her, unsure of what to say. There was silence, save for the crackle of the fire and the wind screaming outside. Finally, she lifted her head. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice breaking. I didn't think I would make it." "You're safe now," Eli said, though even he didn't fully believe it yet. He didn't know what safety meant in a world that could take everything from a person in an instant. Still, he fed the fire more logs and handed her a blanket, watching as her body slowly began to warm. Her hands were red and raw from the cold, and her eyes carried a fear that Eli knew all too well. "My name is Clara," she said, finally, her voice steadier. I lost my husband last month. The storm, it's getting worse. I have my children waiting at home, but I didn't know how I would survive." Ellie nodded, listening. He didn't interrupt. He had learned long ago that words often failed to help. He had his own grief, his own story of loss that he carried silently. And yet, hearing Clara speak made him remember what it was like to care, to feel responsible for another life. "I've been alone for a long time," he said after a moment. "But I can help you. We can get through this storm." Clara looked at him, a mixture of relief and doubt in her eyes. You will?"
You don't even know me.
"I know enough," Eli said, staring into the fire. "The storm doesn't care about who you are, it only cares if you can survive it." For a moment, there was silence. The wind howled, shaking the cabin, but inside there was a fragile sense of safety. Clara wrapped the blanket tighter around her shoulders, and Eli watched her, feeling something he hadn't in years, the stirrings of hope. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside the cabin there was warmth and light. Eli moved to check the supplies, dried meat, flour, firewood, and began planning. He knew the storm could last for days. They would need to ration food, keep the fire burning, and stay awake to watch the walls for signs of collapse. It was hard work, but it was necessary, and for the first time in years, Eli realized he wasn't facing it alone. Clara spoke softly, almost to herself. I didn't think anyone would help me. Everyone told me I should give up, that we would be buried out there. Eli shook his head. Giving up isn't an option, he said firmly. Not if there's even a chance to survive. The woman nodded, finally beginning to calm. She began to speak about her children, about her farm, about the life she had fought so hard to maintain despite the loss of her husband. Eli listened silently, noting every detail. He could see the strength in her, the determination that had carried her through the storm to this cabin. And somehow, seeing her courage made him feel less haunted, less alone. Night fell, and the wind blew even harder. Snowdrifts piled against the walls, and the fire flickered under the cold. Eli kept watch, ensuring the cabin remained stable, while Clara dozed lightly on the blanket by the fire. He found himself thinking about what the next hours would bring. The storm could last for days, and survival would not be easy. But for the first time in a long while, he felt a sense of purpose beyond himself. The storm outside was deadly, but inside, a fragile alliance had formed. Two people, strangers at first, now connected by desperation and survival, huddled together in a tiny cabin on the endless plains. Both had lost so much, yet both still fought to live. And as the snow continued to fall, blinding and relentless, Eli knew that this night, this storm, was only the beginning of a story that neither of them would forget. For now, they were safe. But the storm was not finished, and neither was the fight for survival. The night stretched on, long and quiet, except for the occasional groan of the cabin as the wind battered its walls. The storm outside had not slowed. Snow swirled like a white ocean, and the wind howled like a wild animal seeking its prey. Inside, Eli moved carefully around the cabin, keeping the fire alive. Each log he added sparked a small glow, bright against the shadows that clung to the corners. Clara sat close to the fire, her hands wrapped tightly around a mug of warm broth, her body trembling less now, but her eyes still wide with fear. "You shouldn't have come out in the storm," Eli said quietly, not as a reproach but as an observation. His voice was calm, controlled, but carried an undercurrent of concern. "It's dangerous. Snow like this can kill a person if they're not prepared." Clara swallowed hard, staring into the glowing embers. "I didn't have a choice," she whispered. "My children, they're at home. I couldn't let them suffer while I waited for someone to help. I had to try." Her voice cracked, and she looked away, embarrassed by the tears forming in her eyes. "I thought, maybe you could help. You're strong." "Why?" "You know this land. I heard people talk about you. That you know how to survive storms like this." Eli didn't answer immediately. He moved to check the back door, pressing his ear to hear the wind, then returned to her side. His face was unreadable, but inside a storm of thoughts battled against each other. He had spent years alone. Avoiding attachment, opening himself to someone else was dangerous, painful, yet here she was, a widow with children depending on her, trusting him in a storm that could claim their lives. Something deep inside him stirred, a mix of responsibility, empathy, and against his own will, care. "I can help," he said finally, kneeling to meet her eyes.
"But it won't be easy. The storm is worse than usual."
"We'll have to stay awake through the night, ration what we have, and be careful. One mistake, and we could be in serious danger." Clara nodded quickly, determination replacing some of her fear. "I'll do whatever it takes," she said. "Please, I can't lose them. Not now. Not like this. The fire crackled between them, the warmth beginning to seep through their frozen skin. Eli handed her another blanket, draping it over her shoulders. She shivered, grateful, and for a moment the silence was peaceful. It was a rare, quiet moment in a night dominated by the storm's fury. "I need to know everything," Eli said after a pause. "Where are your children? How far is your home? What supplies do you have left?" Clara took a deep breath, her hands gripping the edges of the blanket. "My home is about 3 miles from here, through the valley. It's small, not much to protect us from the snow. The roof leaks, and the food is almost gone. I had hoped to get to you before it got this bad. I thought maybe you could help me figure out a way to survive the night, and then we can make the journey back together." She hesitated, glancing at him. "I didn't think anyone would answer my plea. I didn't think anyone cared anymore." Eli's jaw tightened. He didn't like hearing her vulnerability, but he understood it. He had lived with grief and loneliness for too long, and seeing it mirrored in someone else was both painful and motivating. "We can make it," he said firmly, "you and I, together." For the next hour, they worked quietly, preparing for the long night. Eli taught her how to check the fire without letting it burn too quickly, how to move quietly around the cabin so the wind didn't push snow inside, and how to ration food carefully. Clara followed his instructions diligently, listening and learning, sometimes fumbling, but never complaining. "You're a quick learner," Eli remarked, nodding at her as she carefully sliced dried meat for their next meal. Clara smiled faintly despite the fear in her eyes. "I have to be," she said. "I don't have a choice." The wind outside began to scream louder, and snow hit the walls in waves. Every gust sounded like it could tear the cabin apart, and every creak in the wood made both of them pause. Eli moved to the window, pressing his face close to the frosted glass. He could barely make out the swirling white beyond. A world turned into a blizzard of ice and shadow. "You see that?" he asked, pointing. "The storm is getting stronger. It may last all night. We have to stay alert. One false move, one misstep, and it could be dangerous." Clara nodded, gripping the mug of broth tighter. Her hands were warm now, but her fingers still shook slightly. "I understand," she whispered. "I'll do whatever you tell me." They took turns keeping watch by the fire, sharing stories to distract themselves from the fear outside. Clara spoke softly about her children, about the life she had tried to build with her husband, and about the farm she loved. Her voice was gentle, laced with sorrow, but also strength. She spoke about the small victories in her life, the things that had kept her going despite loss. Eli listened, initially silently, but slowly he began to share small pieces of his own story. He didn't speak of his family's death in detail, only the emotions, the emptiness, the weight of loss, and the long years of isolation. For the first time in a long time, he allowed himself to connect, to speak honestly about pain and loneliness. "You've been through a lot," Clara said quietly after a long pause. "I can see it in your eyes. But you're still here. You're still fighting." Eli nodded, staring into the fire. "We all fight in our own ways," he said. "Some of us just don't have anyone watching. Some of us fight alone." Clara reached out and placed her hand on his arm, briefly, hesitantly. "You're not alone tonight," she said softly. "Not with me here. We'll get through this together." Eli looked at her, startled by the sincerity in her voice. He had shut himself off for so long that he had almost forgotten what it felt like to care, to be needed, to be trusted. And now, in the middle of a storm that could kill them both, he felt a flicker of something he hadn't felt in years. hope. Hours passed slowly. The storm outside raged, but inside, they created a fragile routine. Eli checked the fire while Clara prepared small meals. They huddled together for warmth, spoke in whispers when fear grew too heavy, and stayed alert for signs of danger. Every so often the wind hit the cabin with such force that the walls shook, and they both paused, hearts racing, silently praying the roof would hold. As the night deepened, Clara began to share her fears more openly. "I'm scared," she admitted, voice trembling. "I'm scared of losing my children. I'm scared I won't make it through this storm. I've never been this alone in my life. Not like this." Eli said nothing at first. He understood all too well. The loneliness, the fear, the desperation. It was a heavy weight. But he put a hand on hers, steadying her. "You won't lose them," he said firmly. "Not while I'm here. You're stronger than you think. You fought your way through this storm to get here. That strength, it's not gone. Not yet." Clara looked at him, tears welling in her eyes, but also a flicker of courage. I hope you're right," she whispered. "I hope we can survive this." Eli nodded, returning her gaze with a mixture of resolve and quiet determination. "We will," he said simply. "We have to." The night stretched on, long and filled with the sounds of the storm outside. But inside, despite the fear and exhaustion, a connection had formed. Two people, both haunted by their own pasts, had found each other in the middle of a deadly winter storm. They shared warmth, shelter, and the first sparks of trust. And though the storm was far from over, they both knew they could face it together. Hours later, as the wind began to wail even louder and snow pressed against the cabin walls, they both fell into a fitful sleep by the fire, exhausted but alive. For Eli, it was the first night in years he had felt the weight of responsibility for someone else. For Clara, it was the first night she had felt hope since her husband's death. Outside, the storm continued to rage, indifferent to the struggles inside, but inside, the fire burned bright, a symbol of life, warmth, and fragile but growing trust. And so, in the heart of a deadly winter storm, two strangers had found each other, their fates intertwined for the night, and perhaps for much longer. Morning came slowly, filtered through the thick frost covering the cabin windows. The wind outside was still fierce, but the first pale light of day cast a faint glow on the snow-covered plains. The storm had not ended. It had merely slowed. But the world outside looked quieter, as though the night had taken some of the storm's anger and held it back for a moment. Inside the cabin, the fire crackled warmly, its orange glow bouncing off the wooden walls and lighting the faces of the two people who had survived the night together. Clara stirred first, blinking against the light and stretching her arms beneath the blanket. Her body ached from the cold and the long hours of worry, but for the first time in what felt like forever, she felt a small sense of safety. She looked around at the cabin, at the small fire still burning, and then at Eli, who was checking the supply of wood stacked near the hearth. The sight of him, so calm and methodical, gave her a sense of reassurance. She realized that he had not only kept them alive, but had done so with quiet determination, without complaint, as if survival was as natural to him as breathing. Eli noticed her movement and nodded. "You slept well?" he asked quietly, his voice low, careful not to disturb the fragile peace that had settled between them. Clara shook her head slightly, smiling faintly. "Not really," she admitted, "but I feel better than last night. I don't know why." "You were stronger than you thought," Eli said simply. "Last night proved it." He moved to the table and poured them both a small cup of water from a metal jug. "We'll need to eat something soon. The storm is still dangerous, but we can start preparing for the day. We can try to make it to your home later, if conditions allow." Clara took the cup and sipped slowly, the warmth spreading through her. I don't even know how to thank you, she whispered. You didn't have to help me, and yet you did. I've never met anyone like you. Eli gave a small shrug, brushing off the compliment with a quiet humility. I've survived alone for a long time, he said. But no, one should face a storm like this by themselves, especially not someone with children waiting at home. You did the right thing by coming here. They moved together around the cabin, checking the fire, preparing a simple breakfast of bread and dried meat, and planning how to ration what supplies remained. Eli explained how they would need to move carefully through the snow if they left the cabin, showing Clara how to step lightly to avoid sinking too deep, how to use the wind's direction to avoid being caught in sudden gusts, and how to gauge the snow's depth by observing its surface. She listened intently, absorbing every word. Her fear was still present, but determination burned brighter in her eyes now. As they worked, they talked. Clara spoke about her husband, about the dreams they had shared for their farm, and the life they had built together, brief and filled with small joys. Her words were gentle, tinged with sadness, but Eli listened without judgment, his own past pressing quietly behind his thoughts. He shared pieces of his story, too, not of the accident that had taken his family, but of what life had been like before the isolation, the small moments of joy, and the simple pleasures of working the land. By speaking, they both found relief from the weight of their fears. The storm outside continued its relentless pace, snowdrifts rising and falling like waves frozen in time. Eli knew the danger it presented. If they left too soon, they could be trapped or buried in the snow. He watched the sky, trying to gauge when it might be safe to move. It's too early to leave, he said finally, pointing toward the swirling white outside the window. The storm may seem calmer, but it's still treacherous. For now, we stay inside. We conserve energy. We keep the fire strong, and we wait for the safest moment. Clara nodded, though her frustration was evident. I know, she said, but I can't stop thinking about them. I need to get back. I need to make sure my children are safe. Eli placed a hand gently on hers, stopping her from speaking further. I understand, he said, but rushing into danger will get us both killed. Survival isn't about rushing. It's about patience and about choosing the right moment to act. They spent the morning in this careful balance between preparation and patience, the storm raging outside, but the cabin a safe haven against it. Eli showed Clara how to check the walls for cracks where snow might be leaking in, how to reinforce the roof with spare beams and logs, and how to move quietly so the wind wouldn't push snow through any small gaps. Clara worked diligently, learning quickly, and Eli found himself impressed by her determination. Despite the fear in her eyes, she had refused to give up. By mid-morning, they had managed to stabilize the cabin further. The roof was reinforced, the windows partially shielded with extra blankets, and the fire burning steadily. They sat together for a moment, exhausted but satisfied, and allowed themselves a short break. Clara held the small bundle of food she had brought, pressing it to her chest as if it contained the life of her children. I can't imagine what would have happened if I hadn't made it here, she said softly, looking at Eli. I think I would have lost hope completely. Eli looked at her, silent for a moment. He had long ago stopped allowing himself to feel hope for anything outside his own survival, but hearing her words stirred something unfamiliar. You're not lost yet, he said, and you won't be. Not while I'm here. The hours passed slowly. They ate a small meal and then began preparing for the possibility of moving. Eli taught Clara how to carry supplies efficiently. how to judge snow depth by observing footprints and drifts, and how to navigate without losing their way. She asked many questions, each one answered with patience and care. Eli was impressed by her attention to detail and her willingness to learn. She was determined not only to survive, but to do so with knowledge and skill. As the day wore on, the storm began to ease slightly. The wind's roar softened to a steady whistle, and the snow, though still heavy, fell less violently. Eli moved to the door and peered outside. The world beyond was still white and treacherous, but it was not as lethal as it had been the night before. "It may be safe to venture out later," he said, turning back to Clara. "We still need to wait for the right moment. The snow is heavy, and the cold can be deadly, but soon we'll have to face it." Clara nodded, her eyes determined. "I'm ready," she said. "I've learned so much from you. I won't let the storm take us by surprise." Eli felt a small, unfamiliar warmth in his chest. For the first time in years, he realized that helping someone could feel fulfilling, not just because he had to survive, but because someone else's survival mattered to him. Clara's courage and determination had awakened something in him that he had thought long dead. They spent the afternoon continuing their preparations. Eli showed Clara how to make small markers in the snow to follow on the journey, how to check for thin ice near frozen streams, and how to move steadily without exhausting themselves. Each lesson built both her confidence and her trust in him, and with each passing hour, the bond between them strengthened. Not romantic, but a deep human connection forged through shared struggle and survival. By evening, the storm had lessened further. The wind still blew, but the blizzard's fury had faded, leaving a quiet, cold world. Outside, snow lay thick and heavy, but the cabin stood strong, a small island of safety. Eli and Clara sat together by the fire, exhausted but alive. The danger had not passed, but they had survived the first part of the storm, and more importantly, they had learned to work together, to trust one another, and to find strength in shared purpose. As night fell again, they settled near the fire, blankets wrapped tightly around themselves. Both were silent for a long time, listening to the faint sounds of the storm outside. But unlike the first night, there was no panic, no raw terror. They had survived. They had learned. And for the first time, they felt the fragile hope that survival, and maybe even life beyond the storm, was possible. In the heart of the winter, in the middle of a deadly blizzard, two strangers had become a team. The storm outside was fierce and unforgiving, but inside they had warmth, shelter, and a growing sense of resilience. They knew that the journey ahead would be even harder, that the storm was far from over, but for now, they had survived together. And that survival, against the odds, had given them both something precious. The knowledge that even in the harshest conditions, hope could endure and courage could grow. The storm had not let up. By late afternoon, the snow was falling in heavy, thick sheets, covering the land in an unbroken blanket of white. The wind howled like a living thing, rattling the cabin's walls and shaking the roof with a terrifying force. Inside, the small cabin seemed fragile against nature's power. Every gust of wind made the wooden walls groan, and snow clung to the eaves, threatening to crush the structure with its weight. Eli Turner moved quickly, his hands steady despite the tension. He checked the fire constantly, making sure it would not go out, and scanned the walls and roof for signs of weakness. The storm had grown worse than he had anticipated. What had seemed manageable in the morning now felt dangerous. He glanced at Clara, who was sitting close to the fire, her hands wrapped around a blanket, her eyes wide with worry. "Eli, the snow," she whispered, her voice trembling. It's piling up too fast. What if the roof can't hold it?" Eli nodded grimly. That's exactly what I was thinking, he said. We need to act quickly. If the snow isn't removed, the roof could collapse. He moved toward the door, preparing to go outside, but stopped. It's dangerous out there. I need you to stay inside, away from the walls and windows. If anything falls, you need to be safe. Clara shook her head, determination in her eyes. I want to help. I can do something, anything, to make this easier. Eli looked at her, torn. He wanted to protect her, but he also knew that she had proven herself strong and capable. All right, he said carefully, you can help, but follow my instructions exactly. One wrong move, and either of us could be hurt. Together they worked to remove snow from the roof. Eli handed Clara pieces of sturdy wood and taught her how to push the snow away in safe sections. The wind tried to rip the blankets from her shoulders, and the snow stung her face like tiny needles, but she persisted. Each movement required strength, careful calculation, and constant attention. They worked in silence mostly, communicating through quick gestures and nods. The storm was relentless, but so were they. The cabin creaked and groaned under the weight of the snow. Eli felt a sudden shiver of fear. One large gust of wind could bring the entire roof down. He shouted over the wind to Clara, "More to the left! Push it this way! Watch your footing!" Clara followed his instructions, her movements precise despite the biting cold. The danger pressed against them from every side, but the need to survive gave them focus and courage. After hours of grueling effort, they managed to remove a significant portion of the snow. Both were soaked in sweat, their faces red and pale from the cold, yet a small sense of accomplishment warmed them. The roof held, for now, and the cabin remained intact. They leaned against the wall for a moment, catching their breath and listening to the storm's roar outside. But the storm was far from finished. A sudden gust, stronger than any before, shook the cabin violently. Snow fell from the roof in heavy chunks, hitting the walls and floor with a loud crash. Clara jumped back, her heart racing, and Eli grabbed her hand to steady her. "Stay low," he shouted. "Hold the blankets over you. Don't panic." They crouched together, hearts pounding as the cabin trembled around them. The sound of wood straining under the weight of snow was deafening. Eli knew they could not stop now. They had to remain alert and continue shoring up the cabin, even as exhaustion threatened to overwhelm them. Dear Brackett, once the immediate danger passed, they resumed their work. Eli taught Clara how to brace the roof from the inside using spare beams, distributing the weight more evenly and reducing the risk of collapse. Clara followed his instructions perfectly, showing a courage and skill that Eli had not expected from someone who had been so terrified just hours before. Her eyes shone with determination, and for the first time, Eli realized that she could truly survive anything. While they worked, they spoke in short bursts, their voices barely audible over the wind. "You're doing well," Eli said, his tone low but sincere. "I've seen people give up in storms half as bad as this." Clara shook her head. "I can't give up. I won't let the storm take my family from me." Her voice quivered, but there was steel in it. Eli glanced at her, feeling a strange warmth in his chest. He had thought he would never care for anyone again, but now, seeing her resolve, he understood the meaning of courage. Hours passed, each moment a test of strength, skill, and willpower. The storm showed no mercy, and fatigue began to gnaw at them. Every muscle ached, every breath was heavy, and yet they persisted. The cabin, though battered and groaning, began to feel safer under their combined efforts. Then came a sudden, terrifying moment. A loud crack, echoed through the cabin as part of the roof shifted under the snow's weight. Dust and small debris fell around them, and Eli's heart skipped a beat. "We have to reinforce it now," he shouted. "Quickly!" Clara followed him, moving with speed and precision. They worked together, placing beams and bracing walls, pushing against the weight of the snow with every ounce of strength they had. Eli shouted instructions, and Clara obeyed without hesitation. Their teamwork was seamless, born of necessity and trust. When the roof finally seemed secure, they collapsed near the fire, breathing heavily, their bodies trembling from cold and exertion. Clara leaned against Eli, exhausted but alive. I thought we wouldn't make it," she whispered. Eli shook his head, his own exhaustion apparent. "We made it," he said. "But we need to stay alert. The storm isn't over yet." They sat in silence for a moment, listening to the wind howling outside. Then Clara spoke softly, almost to herself. "I'm scared, Eli. I'm scared of losing everything. My home, my children, even myself." Eli's eyes softened. He reached out, placing a hand gently on hers. "I understand," he said. "I've been through loss too. I know what it feels like to be afraid and alone. But you're not alone now. Not with me here." Clara looked at him, tears welling in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. I don't know what I would have done without you." Eli felt a lump in his throat. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to feel the weight of connection, the relief of caring for someone else and being needed in return. "We're alive because we worked together," he said quietly. "You were brave. You didn't give up, even when it seemed impossible." The storm continued to rage outside, but inside the cabin, a fragile calm settled over them. They had survived the worst of it, but the ordeal had taken its toll. Exhausted and battered, they huddled together near the fire, sharing warmth and quiet comfort. As night approached again, they spoke of hope and survival. Clara told Eli about her dreams for her children, about the life she hoped to rebuild once the storm passed. Eli shared small, careful pieces of his past, not the tragedies themselves, but the moments of joy and the lessons learned. Through this sharing, they both found solace. The storm outside was still fierce, but inside their hearts were a little stronger, their spirits a little brighter. They prepared for the night ahead, rationing food and keeping the fire strong. Every creak of the cabin and gust of wind reminded them of the danger outside, but they faced it together. Their trust in each other had grown, born of shared struggle, determination, and the need to survive. As darkness fell, Clara leaned back against the wall, exhausted. "I never thought I'd make it," she said softly. "But I think I can." "I think we can." Eli nodded, his eyes on the fire.
"Yes," he said quietly. "We can."
Together, for hours they remained alert, checking the cabin, reinforcing weak points, and sharing quiet conversation. Outside, the storm raged, indifferent to the human struggle within the small wooden walls. But inside, two hearts had found courage, determination, and a fragile hope that even the deadliest winter storm could not destroy. And as they settled near the fire, exhausted but alive, they both knew something profound. The storm was not just a battle of snow and wind. It was a test of strength, trust, and the human spirit. And together, they had passed it. The storm had finally begun to ease. Morning came slowly, pale and quiet, with a soft light that barely penetrated the thick layer of snow. The wind was still cold and sharp, but it no longer howled with the same fury. Outside, the world was covered in a thick blanket of white, smooth and unbroken, stretching as far as the eye could see. The snow glistened under the weak sunlight, reflecting tiny flashes of light that made the frozen landscape appear almost magical. For Eli Turner and Clara Hayes, the quiet was a relief, though it also brought a new awareness of what they had survived. Clara woke first, rubbing her hands together to warm them. She looked around the cabin and saw Eli sitting by the fire, staring into the flames with a distant expression. He had been awake for hours, listening to the wind, checking the walls and making sure the cabin had held. She watched him for a moment, feeling a deep sense of gratitude. Without him, she and her children might not have survived the storm. "Morning," she said softly, her voice breaking the silence. Eli looked up and nodded. "Morning," he replied quietly. "The storm, it seems to be letting up. We can step outside soon, but we need to be careful. The snow is deep, and the cold is still dangerous." Clara nodded, determination in her eyes. "I'm ready," she said. "I want to see my children."
"I want to make sure they're safe." Eli offered a small, encouraging smile. "We'll get there."
Together, they spent the next hour preparing for the journey. Eli showed Clara how to wrap herself and the small supplies they carried in layers to protect against the biting cold. He instructed her on how to step carefully, placing her feet firmly to avoid slipping on ice hidden beneath the snow. They packed the few remaining supplies they had, making sure they could carry them without losing balance in the deep drifts. Finally, with a cautious glance at the sky and the softened wind, Eli opened the cabin door. The world outside was blindingly white, and the snow stretched out like an endless desert. Every step they took was heavy, sinking into the snow with a soft crunch. The cold bit at their faces, and the wind, though gentler, still demanded respect. Yet there was a quiet beauty in the world, a stillness that only came after a storm of such fury. Clara's heart raced with hope and fear as they moved forward. She glanced back at the cabin, her safe haven, and then at Eli, who walked steadily beside her. "I don't know how to thank you," she said, her voice carried by the crisp air. "You saved us. Not just me, but my children, too." Eli shook his head. "You survived because you didn't give up," he said. "I just helped you."
"You were brave, Clara. That bravery is what brought you this far."
For hours they moved carefully across the snow-covered plains, navigating drifts and hidden patches of ice. The journey was slow, exhausting, and dangerous. At one point, Clara slipped, nearly falling into a small hollow hidden beneath the snow. Eli caught her quickly, steadying her. "Be careful," he said. "One wrong step and we could get hurt." "Keep your focus. We're almost there." Finally, as the sun rose higher, they saw it. Clara's small farmhouse, half buried in snow, its roof weighed down but still intact. Relief flooded her chest, and she quickened her pace, dragging her feet through the thick snow. "My children!" she called, her voice trembling with joy and fear. From inside the farmhouse, two small figures appeared at the window. They had been watching the snow, waiting for their mother. Their eyes widened when they saw her, and then, seeing Eli beside her, they ran toward the door. Clara opened it, and the children rushed into her arms. Tears flowed freely, faces pressed together in a mixture of relief, love, and joy. Eli stood back for a moment, allowing the reunion to happen. He felt a strange warmth in his chest, a feeling he hadn't experienced in years. Seeing Clara with her children, alive and safe, gave him a sense of fulfillment that went beyond survival. He had been alone for so long, believing connection only led to pain, but now he realized that sometimes helping others could bring a purpose that nothing else could. Clara finally stepped back from her children and turned to Eli. I don't know what I would have done without you," she said, her voice filled with gratitude. "You saved our lives."
You gave us hope. Eli nodded quietly, unused to praise or thanks, but not entirely unappreciative.
You did most of the work, he said simply. You survived.
You didn't give up. That's what made all of this possible. The snow continued to fall softly, though no longer with the violence of the storm. The world was quiet now, still and beautiful in its frozen silence. Clara invited Eli inside the farmhouse, insisting he rest and warm himself by the fire. He accepted, though reluctantly, allowing himself to feel the comfort of a warm home again. As they sat together, Clara spoke about the future.
We can rebuild, she said.
The farm, the house, the life I wanted for my children. We can start again, stronger than before. Eli listened, realizing that the storm had changed something in both of them. It had tested their courage, their endurance, and their ability to trust one another. And through it they had survived, not just the snow and wind, but the fear and despair that had threatened to overwhelm them. You've changed things, Eli said quietly. Not just for your family, but for me too. I haven't felt hope like this in years. Clara reached out and placed a hand on his arm, a gesture of trust and gratitude. Then stay, she said softly. Stay with us, if you want. You've been our strength through the storm. Maybe you can help us rebuild too. Eli considered her words carefully. For so long he had believed his life was meant to be lived alone, haunted by past losses. But now, standing in a farmhouse filled with the warmth of a reunited family, he realized that life could still offer connection, purpose, and hope. He could help them, protect them, and in doing so, find a way to heal himself. Days passed, and the snow slowly began to melt under the weak winter sun. The wind calmed, leaving behind a crisp, cold world sparkling in white. Eli helped Clara repair the farmhouse roof, clear paths through the snow, and check the farm animals. Together, they worked tirelessly, sharing meals, stories, and quiet moments of laughter. The storm had tested them, but it had also created a bond that could not be broken easily. Clara's children grew more comfortable with Eli, calling him a friend, and slowly he began to allow himself to care for them. The house, once silent and cold, became filled with warmth, life, and hope. Even in the middle of winter, when the land outside seemed harsh and unforgiving, the farmhouse became a place of safety and comfort. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Clara looked out over the snow-covered fields. "We made it," she said softly, almost to herself. "We survived the storm, and we're still here." Eli joined her, standing silently by her side. "Yes," he said, "we're still here, and we'll face whatever comes next, together." The storm had ended, leaving behind a world blanketed in white and filled with promise. And in that quiet, frozen landscape, two people who had once been strangers had found courage, hope, and a connection stronger than fear. The winter had tested them, but it had also taught them the strength of trust, the power of determination, and the value of never giving up. As night fell over the farmhouse, the fire burning brightly inside, Clara and Eli sat together, watching the shadows dance on the walls. The children slept soundly, safe and warm,